Welcome back to the MMA Plug on 98.1 FM, Mile High Sports Radio. I'm your host, Jordan Kurtz. Give me a follow along online at Comments from the Peanut Gallery. We are going to break down this weekend's UFC 298 card. This weekend, we have a matchup in the main event between one of the, at this point of his trajectory, pound-for-pound GOATs in all of MMA history, someone who certainly makes the argument for being the featherweight GOAT now at this stage, as you have Alexander Volkanovski taking on number 3 ranked Ilia Topuria. Now, this fight, if it were under any other circumstance, I absolutely give my bit of confidence toward the champion in Alexander Volkanovski. I think Volk is one of the most well-rounded guys that we've ever seen in MMA. His run as a featherweight champion is nothing short of spectacular. I think that the only fight that has a bit of a question mark to it, as far as, one that went to the cards and you could say, I don't know, was the second fight with Max Holloway. However, in the third fight to close out the trilogy, he put an exclamation point on it in that fight against Max. And it was definitive. It was definitive closure for 3-0 against Max, who many prior to that had him as the featherweight GOAT, had Max as the GOAT. The guy prior to Max, or that most would put at the top of that 45 list, Jose Aldo. Well, Volk has a win over Aldo, too. So that begs the question, at 145 pounds, just how good is Alexander Volkanovski? That's why I say it. In this scenario, I would normally say that I have unwavering confidence, I should say, for Volk. However, him coming off of that head kick knockout to Islam just a couple of months ago in the fall, when he went up and challenged for a second time on short notice the 155-pound title, that scares me. That scares me when he's going up against a guy like Ilia Topuria, who has some of the most insane pop to his punches and the best boxing that we've seen in quite some time. And we know that Ilia Topuria is coming out headhunting. Ilia Topuria is not shy on the confidence. He is walking around and acting as if he is already the champion. He's carrying that essence around him right now. Sometimes that type of confidence can work against you, but for someone like Ilia, who is so well-rounded, you can't say that he can't strike, because he does. He sends dudes to the shadow realm. You can't say that he hasn't been tested or hasn't weathered the storm, because Yusuf Zalal had him on the ropes. He was able to prevail there. He was hurt early on in that fight at 55 with the head kick from Jai Herbert, pushed through the adversity, and then ended up folding Jai over his own body like he was a figure in Toy Story and Andy came in the room. You can't say that he can't grapple, because he can. You can't say that he hasn't been tested by top-tier grapplers, because he shut the lights out for Ryan Hall. He TKO'd Bryce Mitchell. He's gone against power punchers like Josh Emmett. He didn't finish Emmett, but he completely dominated that fight, and he made Emmett's face look like a tenderized steak. So there's really, what can you say as a knock against Topuria? What, he doesn't throw kicks? Okay, well, he hasn't really shown that he needs to have that part in his game. Like I say, this is a matchup that otherwise I would have, and as good as Ilia is, that's how much more I think of Volk. But like I say, because Ilia has that devastating type of power, and he does have the ability to keep the fight where he wants to, that we've seen so far in his career, that scares me in the sense that we don't know where Volk's brain is at. And it's not a sense of how does Volk feel, because I'm sure Volk feels great, or he's going to tell you that he feels great. But that's the thing with concussions and with brain injuries is you can't see them. And once you do have that concussive blow, if you're back in that arena very shortly beyond that, it can happen that much more easily. So my big worry again is I don't know how Volk is going to respond against live bullets once he's in there with somebody who possesses the power that Ilia Topuria does. My heart says Volk, but if I were to throw out any sort of word of advice for a lot of people, I'm just not touching it. There's too big of a variable right there. You know, if you do find good value on the Topuria knockout, knock yourself out. But I don't know. I think under normal circumstances, it's Volk all day. The power is the equalizer in this situation right here. You have the co-main event as a middleweight showcase between a couple of long-standing stalwarts of the division. You have number 3, Robert Whittaker, the former UFC champion, taking on former title challenger Paulo Costa. Now, number 3 ranked Bobby Knuckles, the Reaper, Robert Whittaker. He's coming in with a 25-7 record. His last few fights, you could say that by what it looks like on paper, he's had a rough go of it, and obviously the DDP fight didn't go his way. But then again, when you start weighing, we always talk about it on this program, who you lose to matters, right? Well, those last losses were champions, right? They were Izzy, and it wasn't a title fight at the time, but it's now the sitting champion in DDP. He is in almost desperate mode to get his hand raised. I feel like, you know, I mean, you really have to wonder what is left in the tank for Robert Whittaker if Paulo Costa is able to go out there and get the job done against him. You know, it's one of those questions, and depending on how the fight goes, I guess if it's another mauling the way that it happened against DDP, maybe it's time that he starts evaluating what's next. But if he goes out there and he has a vintage Bobby Knuckles type of performance with the way that the division is shaken up at the top, it's not beyond reason to think that he can go on another run. Paulo Costa is another guy who he definitely needs a win now at this stage. Yes, he has the win that he took against Rockhold, but he's a guy who has had some inactivity. We haven't seen him since August of 2022. He had the injury that pulled him out against Hamzat last fall, and now we're finally getting him back in the mix. The old Paulo Costa fought, it's not the same way that DDP does, but it was, it's same but different, right? He was a walk forward juggernaut style hammer, for lack of a better term. I mean, the way that he just walked through shots when him and Yoel Romero went to war at UFC 241 back in 2019, that's the Paulo Costa that a lot of us grew accustomed to seeing. But the real Borrachinha, the eraser, we were used to seeing this big, hard-bodied up dude who was coming out there and just eviscerating the competition. We saw the lackluster performance in the Izzy fight. You know, that kind of led him to a little bit of people just questioning, you know, is your heart really still in it? You talked about that you had wine before. What's really there left? But Paulo Costa is still a guy who has a lot of time left on the table. But how do all of the injuries throughout the years, how does that affect his ability to still continue to train and perform? You know, I really don't know. But I think that we're going to see a good evaluation of where each of these guys are at within their careers as the number 3 Whittaker takes on the number 6 Costa this weekend. In the feature fight, you have a welterweight matchup between 2 top 10 fighters. Number 8, Jeff Neal, taking on number 10, Ian Machado Gary. This is a crazy fight on paper. This was a matchup that was supposed to happen a while back, didn't happen due to circumstances, and then It got rebooked. As you all recall, Ian Gary was supposed to fight in December, and he was supposed to fight Vicente Luque. But I think that him having pneumonia the week of the fight last time and pulling out, I think that the time separated from that bout to now, even though it hasn't been extremely long, it's only been a few weeks. I think that that has been very helpful for the sense of Ian Gary in that the kitchen, the heat in the kitchen is nowhere near what it was a few weeks ago. UFC 296 timeline that week was where all of the media frenzy and the talk amongst fighters, personalities, so on and so forth, was the Ian Gary situation with the other fighters, with Strickland, with his wife, so on and so forth. A lot of that talk has cooled down over the course of these next few weeks. And, will it ramp up? Today's Tuesday. Will it ramp up by Saturday? I don't know. I don't think that it will mimic the turmoil that was presented back in December by any means. This time removed probably has helped him greatly on the mental side of things. And, this might be actually a big performance for Ian Gary if he was able to channel that energy effectively. There's a few other fights on the card that absolutely are worth noting. Multiple ranked matchups throughout. In the feature slot, or excuse me, on the number 2 slot on the card, we have the 2-ranked bantamweight, who many believe should be fighting for that title coming up next month. But I digress. You have number 2, Merab Dvalishvili, taking on former champion, former Olympic gold medalist, number 3, Henry Cejudo. Cejudo, the former 2-division champion, this could very well be his last dance. It could be the final time that we see him in the octagon. Henry himself said that if he's not in the mix for a title, he's out. Should he lose, this means that he drops the last 2 fights going 0-2. But there's also the other side to look at it. Well, I mean, it was a split decision loss in a title fight against Aljo, and this is a title eliminator fight here against Merab. But his position is certainly understandable. If he were to lose, he'd have to go on a run of at least 3 wins in a row in potentially highlight type of fashion, which would all need to be against top-ranked guys who are also title fight hungry. At 37 years old right now, does he have enough left in the tank to be able to do so? Father Time says no. All of the odds, the percentages, title challengers beyond the age of 35, so all the data speaks against it. But he's not exactly the regular person either. At 135, I think that if he falls short now and has to think about going on a run like that, it's over. Because 135 pounds, in my opinion, is the best division in the UFC right now. And historically speaking, it's arguably the most skilled division in the history of mixed martial arts right now, just with the evolution of the game and the natural progression of where everybody's baseline skill set is at. It's hard to argue that 135 isn't the best ever like it is right now. You have a middleweight matchup in the curtain puller for the main event. You have number 14 ranked Anthony Fluffy Hernandez taking on Roman Kopylov. Now, this is, in terms of where their records sit, it's a fairly even matchup, 11-2 versus 12-2. But I would certainly argue that Fluffy has had a much tougher strength of schedule all along. He got into the UFC fairly early. He is a guy who came up through the LFA ranks, got in through the contender series, and has stopped some big tests along the way. I mean, he submitted Rodolfo Vieira, which nobody thought coming into that fight was going to be the case, given Vieira's world championship grappling background. We do have a friend of ours here. Josh Friend fought both of these guys. I asked Josh what he thought about the fight. Josh said, yeah, I hope they both win, so I look better. Like, well, that's fair enough. Well played there, sir. But, Fluffy has a hard ass head and he's extremely well rounded. Whereas on the other side, Roman gets a little bit sloppy at times, but man, is he explosive, and his 4 straight knockouts speak to that. So this is a fight that, like I said, I mean, you could probably expect to see some fireworks in that mix. You have Amanda Lemish taking on Mackenzie Dern in the main event prelims. That's a women's strawweight fight. You then have Marcos Rogerio de Lima, who is taking on Justin Tafa. That is a heavyweight matchup that is potentially for Rogerio de Lima's number 15 ranking. And another ranked matchup on the card has one of Denver's very own. You have number 15, Andrea KGB Lee, taking on Miranda Maverick. Now, Denver's Miranda Maverick looks to insert herself with the rankings at 125 pounds. She's won the last 3 of 4, and she did finish her last fight against Priscilla Cachoeira via armbar. But that right there wraps up our UFC Fight Night preview segment, folks. Stick around after the break. We're going to be talking a couple of current events in the combat sports world. I'm Jordan Kurtz. Give me a follow along online at Comments from the Peanut Gallery. This is the MMA Plug presented to you by Mile High Sports on 98.1 FM Denver.
Thank you so much for watching. Please hit that like, share, and subscribe button. That helps us continue to produce this original MMA content and bring it for you every single week. Tune in to the MMA Plug on 98.1 FM, Mile High Sports Radio,